Thank you, and good morning to all of you. Sagutin amasi indutsene ketsaguti. I said good morning, my relations, for the opportunity to speak to all of you. It's about governance and transparency and accountability, and some parts to thank the Institute on Governance for the leadership and initiative encouraged or demonstrating to gather us, to challenge us to share our views on these issues. My grandson, my youngest grandson, is 6 years old, and about a month ago, he came to visit me and he was drawing. And he was preoccupied with his drawing, but he had a question. So he said, "Ese, what do you call God?" Ese means grandfather. So I said, "Creator?" He said, "No, you know that Dene word you use?" I said, "Newisine." He said, "Yeah." He said, "How many names does he have?" I said, "He has lots of names, but those are the ones I use." So he thought about it for a while, and he said, "What do you ask him for?" And I said, "I asked him to listen to me. And I asked him to make things better for our people." And he thought about that for a while, then he said, "Do you think he listens to you?" And I've been thinking about it this morning. I shared it with my friend Ovid this morning because in many ways we try to do so much in our lifetime for our children and our grandchildren, and it's good when they ask questions, and good to see young emerging leaders already like Riley. And we're addressing questions about governance. And is it clear for whom? Who are we talking about? What is it? And it brings out the question, do you know each other? Does Canada know who we are as the First People? Do they know who they're talking to? Do they know your name? Have they ever been to your community? And what do you call each other? And at the end, you have to search for what is the real game here? What is government trying to do? And what is it that we want? What are we asking for? And then at the end, you say, do you think we heard each other? Did we listen to one another? Dene Nation, I come from the Dene Nation, and we issued what we call a Dene Declaration in 1975. It was probably the most high-profile instance of where First Peoples declared themselves a nation in Canada in 1975. We answered the question, who are we? We said we are Dene. We're Indigenous people. We have a right to govern ourselves. We are a self-determining people. We have our own plan for ourselves. And that Canada should get to know us, and we should get to know Canada, and we should establish a relationship and address the whole history of colonialism, where Canada became the boss and they legislated for us, and they gave us handouts. And where they deemed worthy, they delegated authority and money and decision-making to us. And we said we wanted to stop that and be treated as a nation. Our history has been one of saying we want our own government in the Northwest Territories. We want to rename the territory because it's just a direction right now. And we call it Denendeh. But we took two paths. Our people were decimated by disease in the 20s, 30s, 40s. And when I was growing up, they were still telling stories about the uncle and the aunt who died on the trails, literally walking along the trails, moving from camp to camp, where, as they say, iyi pawa e deledetli, iguye goidawe. Where along the trail packing, a relative had succumbed and hemorrhaged and hit the ground. Not hundreds, but thousands of our people. In the 60s, we're still living in tents. We're still hunting and trapping, economically independent of the industry, of the oil and gas and mining. And we were starting to understand that a great change was coming, and we had to prepare. And our chief said one day, while we are trying to get a way to establish a whole new government for ourselves, we need help to get money to build houses, to build schools and medical facilities and roads we have to move our people into communities and educate them. And we need some of you to get yourself elected as a member of parliament, to get into the Senate, and we need some of you to run in the legislature of the Northwest Territories. So when we call for a meeting to discuss housing and health and social services and municipal services, some of you are sitting on the other side of the table. It comes down to the crux of, do you compromise? How long are you willing to dance with the devil? Because you compromise yourself. But the direction the chiefs gave was one of necessity. We knew and they knew what we needed to do to survive. And in the instance of where you are forced to say, you know what, this might be our last meal, what do we do, you know? You're faced with that. And not all of our people had to deal with it, but some of us did. And so we had a proposal, a constitutional proposal that said we are going to take all the different communities and regions in the north, create a new public government with capacity to act as indigenous government as well. And that we will allow for the participation of non-indigenous people in that institution, so that Yellowknife and other largely non-indigenous communities could represent themselves as part of one region. There would be a confederation. All the regions would be equally represented. That was our constitutional proposal. It didn't go anywhere because the leadership focused on some other issues. And I don't know what those were, but it was always something that I thought was the single most important thing to do, and it was part of the plan that when division happened and Nunavut was created, that at the same time we were going to create a new government for the people of the Northwest Territories. It is a different institution, and it's a colonial institution. It's delegated powers, the government of the Northwest Territories. And some of us, including myself, said to the chiefs, and I'll make fun of it, I always say that I was one of the ones that said, I will die before I ever set foot in an institution like that. But it took 10 years, and I saw the dire need in the communities. And so in 1987, I got elected as a member of the legislature, and I served 12 years in the cabinet and then the last 4 as a premier. It is a strange place, to say the least, for me. The first issue I had was I had to swear allegiance to the Queen. And I think lawyers and everybody in the professions face that dilemma. And I just said, you know what, I can't do it, I won't do it. Okay, I'll do it, but I'm not going to like it. And the other issue was the Speaker. They said because the Crown creates its institutions, when you speak through the Speaker. So you always have to address the Speaker. So when you answer the question, you say, Mr. Speaker. And for about a year, I didn't do it. Until a blind MLA from Senakilawak one day said, Mr. Speaker, I have a point of order. He said, why does Mr. Kakfwi never address you? And so that forced me to compromise on that as well. But there are some good things. When you look at the House of Commons and you look at question period, I mean, it makes us look like brilliant people in the Northwest Territories, because to the clear questions usually comes very clear, respectful answers. And when we can't answer the question, we give a written response. But we actually answer the question. And people treat each other respectfully, otherwise they are called to order. When I ran into difficulty, personally, with alcoholism as the head of the Dene Nation in 1986, the chiefs rallied around me and they asked me, what did I want to do? The compassion, the support was there. And I said, I want to keep serving, but I can't. I've got to do something about my drinking. And so they said, we'll give you 2 months. 1, to go to a program, and the second month to set your personal business in order with your wife and your children so you can come back to us. That's how they dealt with me. In the legislature, there is no such thing. It's pretty cutthroat. And it's, you know, as soon as somebody falls, somebody jumps up to replace them. And there is no element of trust there. It tells you something that as Indigenous people, I like to think, like myself, my allegiance has always been to my own people, to my own language, to my own culture, and to my own forms of government. The chiefs and the council made decisions for me. The chiefs of the Dene Nation were always my government. And it is to this day where my allegiance is. It has never been to the legislature of the Northwest Territories. I try to be respectful, but I once said, I do not miss it. I have no attachment to it. I went in there to do a job that the chief sent me in for, and after 16 years, I felt like I walked out of a warehouse. I never looked back. I never missed it. You know, ask me, Canada should ask me, how do you do these things? How do we talk to each other? How do we relate? The Dene Nation had a plan. It had a national plan about how we're going to rebuild ourselves, what we're going to need, how we're going to set up our government. We had it written out. We had a plan on how we're going to introduce ourselves to Canada, how we're going to be representing ourselves in the House of Commons and in the Senate. It was there. We got some of it done, and some of the things we failed. There's no doubt about that. Today, we talk about setting up government nation to nation, and I think the same questions will probably prevail there. As Shannon talked about earlier this morning, the transition has been fast. Electricity came to many of our people only in the late 60s, early 70s. Housing, many of our log houses, log cabins, were done away with only in the early 70s. So we could go to school in adequate housing. When we talk about nation to nation, we need to know that Canada is going to have a national strategy. And one of the questions that keep lingering in my mind is, what are we going to do with Indian affairs? So I make no bones about it. For me, that has been the single biggest enemy I've had in my entire career. That everything that I've tried to do, everything that I've tried to articulate and lay out has been thwarted, has been subdued and rejected. And so the element of trust is a huge, huge issue to address when we talk about nation to nation. Because we have to know one another. And it's not just simply a matter of setting up governments, setting up institutions and talking about, okay, well, what's accountability here? What's transparency here? We have to face the reality. In the Second World War, I've said, the Germans were devastated. Their economy, their country, their factories, their people, their houses. Blanket bombing. And no sooner was the war over, then came the plan. Let's help them rebuild. Massive amounts of resources and money was pumped in that country to rebuild it. And the same thing with Japan. We dropped 2 atomic bombs on them. We devastated that country because they went to war. But no sooner have we done that, then again, that's another country where we rebuilt and we went extraordinary lengths to rebuild that. This calls for nothing less. It's not business as usual. It's not, oh, forgot you were here. Tell us what we could do to make sure you have money to run your little programs and your services. I don't think it is like that. We've talked about the need for a strategy. The government is doing little things here and there, National Council on Reconciliation. We have the inquiry for murdered and missing women. We're waiting for Cindy Blackstock to get an answer. She's not getting an answer. Why? We don't know. Let's move on. We're talking about changing the curriculum across the country in all the public schools. There's a lot of little things going on. I don't hear any plans for the Department of Indian Affairs. That rests in there all the colonial, oppressive policies that the government of Canada has had and was mandated to implement So I don't hear it. You know, it's benign to say, well, we need them to help us get some things done. I don't know that. I mean, this is, do you bite the hand that feeds you, I guess is a good quote from people in Quebec. So I don't want to go on to a long ways, but I'm saying, I guess that if it's really nation to nation, then Canada has to sit down and say, sorry, we forgot you were here. We set up these refugee camps for you. We call them reserves. Tell us, how have you been? And who are you, by the way? And what do you think about our relationship? That's what we need. And we will tell you that we feel devastated, that our families have been devastated, our communities, our economies, that we are traumatized beyond measure by residential schools, and we need a lot of help. And we can do it ourselves, we just need the money and the resources. That Canada has to be accountable for what it did to Indigenous people and for what it's done and is still doing. So when little right then asks, what do you ask God for? I tell him I want a better life for him and for my people. Doesn't seem like a lot to ask. Every refugee that ever came to the shores of this country, including the first immigrants and refugees, came here seeking a better life. We are no different. And Canada might start out by saying, who are you, and how are you, and what do you need? We deserve no less than that. Thank you very much. Merci.